Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
This past Christmas, I was chatting with a former commando online. He told me he'd had several spooky encounters in the woods, and I asked him to type them up for me with as much detail as possible. I know hate Innawoods stories and longer stories these days, but I enjoyed reading them. I will share them here in the hopes that others will enjoy them as well. Here goes. I'm a military vet, not in the US. Seen combat. Trained information gatherer and scout. During summer 2016, I began making semi-regular patrols around my property to catch as many tweakers as I could after I had caught them using my property as a shortcut between labs and crack houses on my road. I captured a few war trophies like wallets, phones, or hats, but one especially hot day I was exploring an area I'd not visited before. While there, I found an absolutely enormous old-growth softwood tree. Thing was massive, easily 15 feet around at the base. It had good coverage if I wore good camouflage and offered a good view of a highway the tweakers used. One especially hot afternoon, I was patrolling when I sat down at the base of the tree and rested a moment. I leaned back, drank from my canteen, and closed my eyes for a bit. When I did that, the wind picked up and I began to shiver from the unseasonable cold. I opened my eyes, turned to my right, and saw it. There was a human silhouette, about 30 feet in the air. He was totally transparent, about the size of an average adult man, and hovered perfectly still in midair in front of the alder trees behind it. It was clear enough that I could see the trees behind perfectly. All that was there was the outline of a man, without legs. It just trailed off into nothingness. It was like reality was embossed around the shape of this thing, and I could feel it was just staring at me. A slow, creeping horror came over me as I stared at it. I blinked and it stayed in place. I blinked again and it still didn't disappear. I felt paralyzed with uncertainty and fear. It was clear I was in this thing's home and I was not welcome. I sat up and slowly I looped the shoulder strap of my backpack over my arm, grabbed my rifle with my other hand, and in an instant I was on my feet, turned away and running the opposite direction while the wind kicked up again. Even in direct 98-degree sunlight, I still felt as cold as in winter. Trees shook, leaves fell around me while I sprinted through the swamp back to familiar territory, till I realized I was totally lost. I ran in the direction I'd come from familiar territory, but I was nowhere I'd been before, in a clearing in the swamp. I took cover behind a fallen tree and began appraising the situation. I was still alive. Far as I could tell, I was still thinking rationally. I knew the direction I came from, and relative to that I had a rough idea of where the road was. The creek was still present, and if I followed it far enough I would eventually find where I came from. Slowly I began exploring the clearing, and found a small trail behind another old cedar where I was. The tree was blocking the exit from view perfectly. I still felt like I was being watched, and I wasn't welcome, but I followed the trail, and after about a quarter mile, I was only about 100 yards from familiar grounds when I began running. I finally found my way back to my property. It took me a long time to return to that area. I'm man enough to admit I was terrified of what I'd seen. Eventually I got enough balls to return with a better plan, and soon after arriving the wind kicked up again, just as violent as last time. This time I began to pray, and using advice from wannabe pagans I used to know, audibly spoke into the woods that I had no idea what that thing I saw was and that I have no quarrel with it, but it does not have my permission to follow me home, nor do I allow it to follow anybody I know or care about. I returned to that area multiple times afterwards and never had any other such experiences, but I made damn sure to always say aloud that it didn't have those permissions. At this point I asked the commando if the wannabe pagans ever told him what they thought that thing was. He said the following: "Forest white is what they called it, like a spirit that protects the forest in Euro myth, I guess. They suggested I leave an offering, something without any artificial plastic, rubber, etc. components, so I left a wooden figurine and a bagel once. Didn't do shit. I found this guy's stories nice reads just before bed. Here's another. So when I was in high school my family managed a burger shack. It wasn't much more than a grill, 2 fryers, and a cash register in a horse trailer, but we had a good fan base in our town for our menu. In our town was a local schizoid we'll call Roy. In my parents' generation Roy was a big damn deal. He was the first to bring our high school football team to state. He was popular, and had no shortage of girlfriends when he was young. But all that changed after his brother died in a murder disguised as a hunting accident by another local schizoid. That drove Roy into a long, unbelievably deep, dark spiral he never fully left again. He ended up diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and every few months would go off his meds. Then he'd begin attacking the asphalt road in front of his shack with a pickaxe. He'd say he was trying to dig down into the tunnel that the zippers used when they wanted to steal things from his home and escape undetected back into the woods. The zippers were so called because of their speed, they'd zip in and out again. Roy had been banned from every public space in that town for his panhandling and threats to people who questioned him. Roy claimed my family had a good aura. We always treated him with respect, and my parents were friends of his before his episodes. Roy, upon request, could immediately recite all the numbers off the plate on every telephone pole in the town. He'd often claim he was a reincarnated soldier from the Union Army named Robert G. Stebbin. Anyways, my family would often deliver fresh water to him in gallon jugs. On one visit, he offered to show me the room where he spoke with Satan on a nightly basis. I politely declined. Roy had torn all the flooring from his 2-room shack to burn for heat and to expose the zipper's hidden tunnel network. This is where I ended up seeing what I saw. One day after work, I had a friend of mine tag along while making our weekly deliveries. Being off his meds for so long made Roy a serious talker. He'd jabber on for hours with his delusional ramblings, never meaning to waste our time. Though that's exactly what he did. So my friend and I sat politely listening to him. And after a while, I looked past Roy's shack and saw something in the woods behind it. What I saw was a humanoid, standing about 1.5 times as tall as a man, but about half as wide. It was covered in shaggy black hair. It looked back over its shoulder at us before bounding away into the brush, moving much faster than any person would be able to in such thick woods. I'd have assumed it was just my eyes playing tricks on me as I listened to Roy's ramblings. The sun was going down, till my friend tugged on my sleeve and asked,
Did you see that movement too?
After a silent, intense car ride home, we finally talked about it. My friend only saw something move. I got a better look at it. We discussed what it logically could be, till we decided it didn't fit any logical explanation we could think of. So we agreed not to talk about it. Roy died a few years ago after letting some tweakers move in with him. Now his old hut has been demolished, and the road leading to it is blocked by several abandoned cars and intentionally felled trees. At this point, after I incorrectly described it back to him, the commando specified. It was bipedal, roughly human proportions, just way tall, stretched out and covered in matted black hair. It looked over its shoulder as it ran off. Anyway, that's it. I'm off to work. Hopefully someone else enjoyed these.
I think serial killers are people with some messed up bits of code in their heads that are a leftover from our more predatory ancestors. I've personally had some experience with a serial killer in my hometown if anyone is interested. It's not your typical /X/ story, but it's still interesting enough. I was going up for a hike in these canyons like I normally do a couple times a month. It's a great spot and good for exercise. There's an old train bridge that goes across the ravine at some point. I say old, but it's been rebuilt recently. Anyhow, I decided to explore underneath the bridge and see what's down there. There's a lot of old abandoned rusty parts from construction, beer bottles, and a camping chair. For some reason, I can hear what I'm pretty sure is people talking/walking up above. At some point I hear what sounds like a cry for help, so I shout back and get a response. I run closer, but then there's a crash and a thud in the trees up ahead of me. I push through the bush as fast as I can, very slowly, and find the body lying there. I'll spare you any gruesome details, but to say the least, the injuries were incompatible with life. I shout up for help, but they either don't answer or can't hear me. I freak out and try to call 911, but this place is pretty remote and cell service is mostly non-existent. At this point I'm not sure whether to move the body with me to the trail or leave it where it is. I decide it's probably a bad idea to mess with a potential crime scene, and plus I don't want to get all bloody or carry a gross, disgusting, mangled corpse around. As I head back to the path, I can hear twigs/branches snapping in the distance. It's pretty much impossible to move in thick brush without making any noise. This person was trying, but without a whole lot of success. I immediately got a flash of, oh shit, when I realized that they might not have friendly intentions. It's hard to explain, but just the way they were moving, it sounded like they were trying to make as little noise as possible. So why would someone be doing that? And right after someone calling for help fell off the bridge? And after I had been screaming for someone to help? Fight or flight response kicked in. I sort of ignored my instinct and went for an intermediate option. I went a ways back into the brush and hid myself while still having a decent vantage point of the area the body had fallen in. The noise coming through the brush got closer and closer, and after about 5 minutes I could see someone walking down the slope towards the body. Their clothing wasn't remarkable, I honestly don't even remember what they were wearing. As for a description, I'm really not the best kind of person for that. I don't remember really specific details much like that, so all I can really say is the guy wasn't very tall, probably around 40-ish years old, and had some sort of hat on. Clothing was muted, no bright colors, but it was still easy to see him. The guy walks up to the body, and looks all around, probably looking for me. When he can't find anything, he goes back to the body, starts examining the wounds. The main thing I remember about his manner is that it was predatory. His walk, posture, it all screamed to me that this man was a predator. The man pulled a small folding spade out of his backpack and proceeded to drag the body further into the forest. I could tell he'd done this before, just on the basis of how confident and assured he seemed to be. I waited for the noise to fade away, then got up and moved as quietly as I could back toward the trail that leads back down to the park entrance where my car is. It took me about 4 hours to get here, so it's not exactly an easy hike back. After a certain point I stopped trying to be quiet and just sort of half run/jog the best I can through the tangle of trees/brush, dead logs and uneven terrain. It takes me a bit, but I get back to the trail, so I take a quick breather before heading back up the slope to the main trail. That's when I hear a sound. It's faint, barely noticeable, but I'm always paranoid about bears/cougars on hikes, so I have a pretty good ear for these things. I sort of realized all at once that this guy was a lot smarter than I'd given him credit for, that he somehow knew I would be watching or saw me and pretended to walk off to bury the body to give me a false sense of security.
My first instinct is to just dash off down the trail like an idiot, running and screaming for help. I came so close to doing that. If I had, I honestly think I wouldn't be here today to tell the story. The whole thing is a bit of a blur in my mind, but I recall thinking about how he had outsmarted me and basically tricked me into thinking he hadn't seen me while he followed me covertly. Thinking about it, I wondered just how long he'd known I was there. He probably had seen/heard me from the top of the bridge, maybe watched me for a while when he came down. It's hard to say because this is all stuff I'm thinking of in retrospect. But it was clear in the moment that he had outsmarted me because I'd underestimated him, and that he was much more dangerous than I'd first anticipated. He was moving with uncanny silence now. If I hadn't been aware of him, I wouldn't have heard him at all. I actually hadn't heard him at all for a few minutes, and I was scared that he was way too close for comfort at this point. So rationally, assuming that he couldn't kill me if I ran away was dumb. The smartest way to play it would be to pretend I didn't know he was following me. So I made a show of being upset/scared and trying to make a call on my phone. Of course there is no service. Before going back up the trail. As the trail reaches the top of the canyon, it continues along in various straight stretches for quite a ways. Basically, it's hard for someone to sneak up on you because it's a big long straight gravel trail and more of a gravel road than anything else. I actually see 4x4 vehicles driving on it every now and then. I have a really good feeling he's behind me, but I'm too afraid to turn and look behind me because then I think he'll know I know he's following me. But at the same time, maybe not looking is suspicious. But I pretty much decide to keep walking ahead, at a hurried pace but not too fast, even though my heart is pounding like a jackhammer.
After a while walking, I take out my phone and pretend to try and make another call on it, but I actually take a quick sneak at the reverse camera/selfie thing on the camera app, and I'm able to confirm that he is in fact on the trail, following behind me. I'm a few minutes away from full-blown panic and still trying to stay as normal as possible while this killer is stalking behind me. Does he have a gun? If he has a gun, he could be shooting me at any moment. It could just be lights out, my life shut off without me even having the courtesy of hearing the bullet before it disconnects my brain. Should I just charge him? Try to ambush/surprise him? Is he waiting for something? When is he going to make his move? What should I be doing? That's pretty much the shit that was going through my head. I had no idea what I was going to do. Then I had the thought that he knew that I knew he was following me. What if I'd underestimated him again? What was he planning? I'm not sure if it was adrenaline or fear that caused the response, but something just sort of clicked inside me. I realized that this guy was a predator, and that he was familiar with the chase. He delighted in the fear of his victims. He could probably read the fact that I knew he was following based on my body language. He could probably tell I was terrified out of my mind. And he was probably getting off on it. So I did the one thing he would never have expected. I stopped, turned around and started walking towards him. I don't know where I got the confidence from, but it came out of nowhere. All of a sudden I wasn't scared, I was angry. I was furious. I was the opposite of scared. He was obviously a bit confused, as he stopped walking to stare as I came toward him. As I came further, I pulled the 6-inch buck knife I keep on me for bears out, tossed it off to the side like it was worthless as I kept walking toward him. I'm not sure why I did that, even now. I was basically acting on pure, primal instinct at that point. The memories I have of it are almost in third person, like I'm watching someone else. In any case, whatever the reason, I tossed my knife away, screamed at the top of my lungs while pounding my chest and charged him at full speed. I was around 20 feet from him when he pulled what I think was a gun out of his waistband. I'm honestly not sure because I never got a good look at it. If it was a gun, maybe the safety was on, it jammed, or it was a fake. God knows. All I remember from that point is slamming into him, wrapping my arms around him in a bear hug. I had about 4 or 5 inches on him height-wise and probably around 50 pounds in weight. I don't remember how long the struggle lasted, but it ended when I chucked him off the side of the path into the ravine. Which was at this point of the trail, an extremely steep slope that was basically 800 feet nearly straight down to the riverbed. You've probably heard of the adrenaline giving you a shitton of strength thing, and I'm absolutely certain it's true because I literally picked him over my shoulder and tossed him a good 10 feet straight out from the path before he began to fall. I saw the whole thing in slow motion as I did it. The panic and fear in his eyes, the struggle, the panic, the flailing as he began to fall. Anyway, I took a while to collect myself and then I just kept walking back to my car. And yes, I still hike there to this day. Because screw letting that asshole take my favorite hiking spot from me.
Waiting at the bus stop outside this church. Not even late, only about 8 p.m. Man around 60 joins me. Sup. Make conversation with me, just small talk. Then he segues into talking about dreams. Starts telling me about how there are 2 kinds of dreams. General dreams that everyone thinks of when you think of dreams, and the kind where you go to another plane. Don't say anything and he just keeps talking. Tells me that there's an easy way to tell them apart, but it usually involves someone who's died. In a general dream you do things you did with that person when they were alive, specifically you talk to each other. In the another plane, they can't talk, they can only gesture. That's when they've taken you to their side or another plane. Don't say anything. Bus pulls up. Ask him if he's getting on. It's not his bus, but thankfully it's mine. Just as I get on he tells me, next time, go with him and you'll be alright. About 4 years earlier a friend of mine died. I'd had dreams about him since then, but I'd had one a few days earlier that was eerie, but calming at the same time. In it, he didn't speak to me, he just kept nodding his head for me to follow him. Then we reached some kind of wood and stopped in front of a tree with an opening in it and a blue light coming from inside that he pointed to for me to go inside of. Wake up spooked. Didn't tell anyone about the dream because why would I? Never see the man again even though I still use that bus stop for another 12 months or so.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.